I mean, I hate to use the word phony, but it almost is the word that strikes me, because Larry was the grand dragon of a state, but yet it was a very small group of people that were actively involved in his group. You know, he had a bodyguard and he had a few members, but who Larry was when he was the Grand Dragon was more or less in his head.
Adonai roi lo echsar bino deshe yarbitzeni al me menuchot nachaleni ki ata imadi Shivtecha u'mishanetecha hema yenachamuni.
On September 6, 1992, a man dies. Several days later, he is buried on Mount Lebanon, the Jewish section of the Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln, Nebraska. The details of his story include phone calls, apologies, hallucinations, a troubled childhood, 7 amputations, a religious conversion, the 23rd Psalm, 3 rings, 9 months, a mailbox, a soft, subtle voice, a KKK calling card, an ophthalmologist, a curious woman.
I used to drive by Larry's apartment all the time, thinking about stopping, but I was afraid to because I didn't know what his mindset was. And I was real drawn to the idea of talking to him, but there was always a police car there, so I didn't.
Well, the first thing I did was I made a call to his home. I believe it was a Sunday afternoon, if I remember right, Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and I just simply stated, I didn't say who I was, I just simply stated, you're going to be sorry you ever moved into his address, and then I said, Jew boy.
And the phone rang. And I picked it up, and a voice on the other end of the line said, "You'll be sorry you ever moved into 5810 Randolph Street, Jew boy."
And the phone rang, and Michael answered the phone, and this voice on the other end said, "You'll be sorry you ever moved into 5810 Randolph Street, Jew boy."
In 1995, a book was published entitled Not by the Sword: How the Love of a Cantor and His Family Transformed a Klansman. The Disney Corporation bought the rights to the story and own it, quote, throughout the universe and for all eternity. Their script includes a car chase, a love affair, and a grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan who is neither blind nor a double amputee nor a convert to Judaism. Lawrence Roger Trapp was born on May 30th, 1949, in Omaha, Nebraska. By the age of 6, Trapp had developed the diabetes from which he would later die at the Randolph Street home of Michael and Julie Weiser.
I was really drawn to Larry before anything ever happened, because about a year before we had any personal contact with him, I knew who he was for a variety of reasons. I had been working for some doctors, and the floor of the hospital was very quiet, and all of a sudden we heard all these obscenities being shouted, and people, the nurses running into the room, and I heard them say Larry's name. we're going to call security, Larry. And I said, I bet it's Larry Trapp.
It's a proven fact that the white race is becoming the minority race gradually. We will prevent that from happening. It will stop.
I came home from the temple at about 5 or 5:30, and I picked the mail up out of the mailbox at the curb and brought it in the house. There was a big fat envelope.
We came home from work and we found a packet of mail in our mailbox, and it was mostly anti-Jewish kinds of material. And on the top of all of this anti-Jewish material was a little calling card that said, "The KKK is watching you, scum." And that is when I really felt fearful.
You'd be surprised what fear can do, especially to a person with a family, either a man or a woman. You can say something about, well, you know where their kids go to school, and you don't have to actually say what you're going to do to them, just say that you know where their kids go to school. Being an ex-police officer, I knew what I could and could not say.
Trapp conducted substantial business from Efficiency Apartment number 3 at 817 C Street. By mail, by phone, and through regular meetings with Klan members and local skinheads. Trapp organized the March 1991 ransacking of Omaha's Vietnamese Resettlement Association. He brought Tom Metzger's show Race and Reason to Lincoln, Nebraska's cable access channel and said during an interview, quote, "We sponsored this show just to let the general public know more about the white movement, to let them know that we're not the killers society seems to say that we are. We just have a goal in mind." He used a tape recorder to make lists and record his thoughts. He would edit these recordings for his racist telephone hotline, the vigilante's voice, where the truth hurts. After his outgoing message, callers were invited to leave one of their own.
I decided I was going to call him if I could, find out his phone number and call him. And Julie said, she was brilliant, she said, well, if you ever get him, say something nice to him. He won't know what to do about that.
And he would leave messages, like, "Why do you love the Nazis so much? You're a disabled person. You would have been one of the first to be killed."
When I called, Larry knew about what time I was going to call, and he left a 30-second fart noise on the tape. And when it was over, I was inspired by it, and I said, it sounds like the voice of the master race to me. And finally, one day, Larry answered the phone and yelled into the phone, why do you keep calling me? Why do you keep calling me? You're harassing me. I'll have your ass in jail. I remember that real clearly. He sounded angry and bitter and awful. And I remembered what Julie had suggested, and I said to him, well, Larry, I know you're a disabled person. I thought you might need a ride to the grocery store.
And Larry's voice got quiet, and he said, "No, I have that taken care of. Thanks anyway. But don't call this number anymore. It's my business phone."
I had one of my nurses listening, and I said, I asked her, I said, well, what do you think this is all about? I said, would you trust this person? She said, no. She wasn't a racist. She was just putting herself in my position. Would I trust that person? Usually if you don't know about something, you'll fear it. And not knowing what his intentions were, a soft, subtle voice, it worried me.
He, in fact, has said on numerous occasions that he was moved more by the quality of the voice than by the words. And he said there was something in the voice, and I knew this person was telling me the truth. And he was moved by that, the sound of the voice. And I think that he was already primed to hear it. He was already wanting to hear it.
On his racist hotline, he left the home address of an African-American activist and encouraged callers to, quote, pay her a visit and let her know what you think. One night, his cat wouldn't stop crying, so he shot it. To his favorite nurse, he said, "Leave your fucking hands off my fucking television." She walked out and never returned. Someone left a poem on his hotline about a fish laid against a wall with its eyes popping out. One day, Trapp had difficulty finding his way into an elevator. A woman offered to help him. He declined, saying, "No thanks, I'll do it myself." "Where are you from?" he asked. "I am from Vietnam," she said. On November 12, 1991, Larry Trapp pulled Race and Reason off the air.
And I said, "Larry, I see you've taken the program off the air." And he says, "Yeah, I'm rethinking some things. I remember that." I said, "Well, do you want some help with that? You want to talk about it?" He said, No, I'll handle it myself." It was kind of a stock reply. Anyway, the next night, it's Saturday night, he called me up, and he called me the rabbi, even though I'm a cantor. He didn't know what a cantor was in those days. And he said, "Is this the rabbi?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "This is Larry Trapp." I said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "I want to get out of this, and I don't know how."
Larry told Michael that he wanted out, but he didn't know how. And so Michael asked if we could come over, and at first Larry really balked and didn't really want to do that, and Michael kind of persisted and said, "Larry, come on, we need to talk."
And so I told him that I'd talk to him, and did he want to talk right then, that night, Saturday night? And he said yes. And so I said, "Well, I'll bring over a little bite to eat. We'll have something to eat, and we'll talk about it." So I hung up, and I told Julie what had happened, and Julie said, "Hey, we ought to bring the guy a little gift or something." He's probably just as leery of us as we are of him.
I thought, God, what am I going to take this guy? I can't take him candy, he's diabetic. Can't take him a book, he's blind. So I started rummaging through this jewelry box, and I found this ring that I had given Michael that was this silver kind of braided ring that I thought was pretty that he never wore. And so I decided to take him this ring.
So we drove to his house and knocked on the door and opened the door, and Larry let us in. And I reached out and shook his hand, and he started to cry.
Larry started tugging at these rings that he had on his fingers that were swastika rings, and he pulled them off his fingers and he put them in Michael's hands, and he said, I want you to get rid of these and get them out of my life.
I had two swastika rings on, one on this finger and one on this finger over here. They're Maltese crosses, or iron crosses, some people call them, and they had a swastika in the middle. And the minute I shook Michael's hand, I couldn't wear them anymore. And I took them off and I gave them to him. I said, "I can't wear these." And it was just a good feeling I had, just a feeling that I had the feeling I was doing something right.
I put this ring on his hand, or Michael did. I don't really recall who put it on his finger, but one of us did. And we just, we kneeled down beside Larry's wheelchair and we were all crying. And after that, it was all history.
Trapp wrote a letter to the office of the White Knights, quote, "Please accept this as my resignation from the Ku Klux Klan, effective immediately. This resignation is due to personal reasons." In the months that followed, he apologized to everyone he remembered harassing. He made phone calls, lectured to school groups, spoke at the temple's Martin Luther King Jr. birthday celebration, and made other public appearances.
Okay, Larry, this is Jessica with the next question.
In the February 14th, 1992 issue of Time magazine, you did an interview with Daniel S. Levy. One of the questions he asked you was, what was it that first made you hate? And you replied that you were raped at a very young age by a group of black boys. And
I didn't quite understand what you said there.
She said that in the issue of Time magazine where you were interviewed, Larry, the question was asked to you about what first made you hate? And they referred to the incident in Kearney.
Most of the people from the media, and I think unconsciously so, acted as if they were doing us a favor, when really what they were doing was disrupting our lives. But on the other hand, the word that got out through the media, even though sometimes it was a bit distorted and sometimes it was angled in this way or that way, the word got out that there is this possibility that every human being can change.
Julie became his full-time nurse. For the Weissers' 3 children, it was an unforgettable experience.
This man had threatened our family. After you get to know him, he had feelings and emotions, and he was a nice person.
It's just an experience, like I say, I didn't think I had any friends, you know. But I've got more than I thought I had. And that's, that feels a lot better than hating.
I think the story with Larry, I mean, I think it was pumped. And it was pumped because there are people out there who want to show all the other people, look what can happen. Look at this story of hope and redemption and love. And so, as real as that is, it still can be played upon.
I'm sort of the tail end of the Holocaust survivors. Within the framework of what happened to Jews during the Holocaust, Larry's deeds struck me as really small-time, as the actions of a small-time hoodlum. I think at the time I didn't realize really how aggressive he had been against people in the community, against blacks and against Jews. And I didn't want to glorify him in any way by giving him more importance than he was worth.
Follow.
You know, that thing is broken.
I'm going to take it back and see if they can fix it.
They can't fix it, throw it away.
No, it's $32.
That wasn't $32.
Yes, it was. They're expensive.
Well, that broke because...
But you know what? I'll bet you could cut the end off of this
Good.
and tape this on there.
Sure you could.
Will you do it now?
No.
Oh, come on. It'll only take a minute.
I want to.
Well, I'll do it then. I'm going to go do it. Because if you cut the very end off of
Yeah,
that...
I would use the whole thing.
Julie began to attend to Larry's personal needs. She shampooed and cut his hair, shaved his face, trimmed his nails, changed his bedding, and prepared his meals.
I went on this, like, cleaning spree, you know, and started throwing out all of this stuff that was gross, you know, and clothes that were ruined with food stains. And, you know, I mean, we bonded, all of us bonded, and it felt so right that I guess I started, I don't know, the maternal dimension kicked in or something. I don't know what happened, but I just felt like it was okay to straighten things out.
One day, Julie rearranged some of Larry's belongings. Later, when he couldn't find them, he flew into a rage, screaming, "I've been looking for my goddamn toothbrush, and you've moved it. And I'm a blind person, and you can't move a blind person's belongings." Surprising even herself, Julie struck him hard on the back as she walked toward the door. But Trapp called her back.
If you're going to leave and you're not ever going to come back, he said, I at least want to see what you look like. So I walked over to this desk, and Larry turned the lamp on, and he put on these glasses that had the magnifying glass attached, and he was adjusting it, and he asked me to kind of lean down so that he could look. All of a sudden, I looked through this magnifying glass, and all I could see were these big blue eyes, you know, just filled with tears, and it was kind of a pivotal moment where everything kind of changed.
Whatever I said before, no matter how hateful it was, no matter how damaging it was to a person, I was always backed up by other people with the same ideas. Now I'm on my own, I'm learning how to love people again. And that's a whole different way of life, you know. It's not easy, Sometimes I think to myself, well, these guys were my friends, but really, if I stopped to think they weren't my friends, they were using me because I had a way to get in. I had my handicap. Well, I don't call it a handicap, I call it a disability. I had my lack of legs and my blindness to get me in the door. So I could get in places they couldn't because people would feel sorry for me because of the way I was. Then I could really nail them to the wall once I got in the door.
We knew that Larry couldn't go on living by himself, and we also knew that whatever support system he used to have was gone because he was now the enemy for his former colleagues. And we knew that it would be wrong for us to not continue to grow our relationship with Larry. And so we decided to invite him to come live with us.
Julie had the harder job. She invited him to move in. Dad would have never made that step, I don't think. He would have definitely called, he would have definitely traveled to his apartment and talked to him and help him find a place and help him with his medical difficulties and all that. But he would have never brought him into the house. He would have never paid for his medication. And I think that's where Julie comes in.
When this all started, it was really initially between Michael and Larry, the initial contact, the initial breakthrough. But once that happened, I think that Larry had this rapport with me because for a variety of reasons, Larry had been wanting a woman to be a part of his life.
Larry's room began to fill with a growing collection of model trains and Martin Luther King memorabilia. He studied Jewish faith and traditions with Michael and expressed his desire to convert to Judaism. He acquired a cat, a bird, and a hamster.
You know, when Larry came to live with us, he needed a full-time nurse because he was so sick, and so my mom became that nurse. And she was running around after him, and she didn't really have time for us kids, and so I kind of felt like I didn't have a mom because she'd be running around the house, but she was doing things for Larry because it was like having a little baby around all the time. You know, you need to constantly take care of him.
I've told Julie that I haven't been confused until I moved in here, and that's the truth. I never had a family life, so, you know, things that go on, I like what I see. I love the kids, you know. They tear my nerves up once in a while, but I think that's what I think I did the same thing when I was little. You know, of course, if I got out of line, I'd get a fist upside my head.
He says he wasn't that confused until he lived with our family, which isn't true, I don't think. But there is this sense of confusion because he doesn't know how families are. He doesn't understand that relationships, there's all this conflict in relationships. It doesn't matter if you love someone or you hate someone. There's conflict in families.
There's a story to give hope. There's a story to give a lift to someone who feels downtrodden. There's a story to show that even the most recalcitrant individual in the world can change. Or is the story made better by telling the dark side along with it? The dark side of the doubts and the hassles and the yelling and the screaming that went on. How necessary is that? It's a tough question.
If you close your eyes, you know you can open them again and see again. When you're blind, there's nothing you can do to see again. So you have to learn to cope with the situation the way it is. You know, you've got to kind of retrain your lifestyle. That's like a lot of people don't understand why I have to have things in certain places and why, if they're moved, Julie or the kids will move sometime. They'll move it maybe just 6 inches away from where it originally was. But that 6 inches is enough to really throw me off track. You know.
Towards the end of his life, Larry worked diligently on his model train collection and often played audio tapes of engines, whistles, and signals.
Here we go, yeah, that's going.
You want it on now?
Yeah, but we'll keep it on low.
We missed some. There was one blue engine coming out of the park. Let's get it.
When I heard that Larry would be one of our hospice patients, I volunteered to be his hospice nurse. I like a challenge, and I knew that Larry would be a challenge because of what I had heard about him in the media. And indeed he was. I believe there had been numerous phone calls back and forth between the Weissers and Larry's father. I'm not sure if Larry actually made the phone calls, but I know that it was important for those two to get together. And it was also a real difficult situation because Larry's father was very angry at the Weissers and suspicious of them, and he would not come into their home if they were there.
Larry's parents were so abusive and so neglectful of Larry's needs physically and emotionally. So I think that almost everything Larry did was a response to what he learned in his household growing up.
So everything I did, or nothing, I should say nothing I did, impressed my dad. Whether I was on the right side of the law or the wrong side. I became a police officer in a small town. In fact, I became the chief of police of Pierce, Nebraska, a small town. And that was wrong. He says, I can't imagine you carrying a gun. Well, my sister took a different view of the whole thing. She became very anti-racist. Myself, I took Dad's way. I thought, well, I want to impress Dad. Everything I did, I tried to impress Dad. In fact, he said he wasn't a racist yet when he found that I was living with the Weissers. He called Michael Weisser up and he says, why don't you keep your big Jew nose out of family business?
Larry was so scared of his father, and he refused to be alone with his father that day. He really was a scared little boy. He knew how close it was to the end, and it was very important for him to tell his father that he was sorry. I was touched by how hard it must have been for Larry's dad to be able to apologize to Larry after all these years, and for what all Larry had done in his life. That would be real hard for a father, even though I think his father's behavior when Larry was young precipitated this behavior.
One troubling aspect of the story is that people came to the conclusion that Larry's immoral acts were the consequence of an unhappy, troubled childhood. And I think that's a great simplification of how a person is prompted to perform evil deeds, and leaves to the side larger social questions on how evil ideologies are expressed. Those issues were never analyzed in the Larry Trapp story. The focus was entirely on the relationship of Larry and Michael. I think a lot of people felt that Michael's stance exemplified the highest morality. I guess I don't. I don't see his motives as being as much moral as emotional. Emotional in terms of his own needs for the kind of recognition that the publicity awarded them.
If all these other people had approached Larry all along and nothing had worked, I think that the fact that he and Michael had I wouldn't say I mean, it wasn't exactly the same, but they had very similar childhoods and upbringings. And the things that happened to Larry as a child happened to Michael as a child, and even as a young adult.
One evening, Larry asked Michael to step into his office. He said, "I'm ready to convert to Judaism and join the congregation." Michael asked him, "Why? Why on this day?" Larry replied, "My father and I have forgiven one another. We've had a Yom Kippur."
That was part of the story about Larry that made it so newsworthy, but I really didn't care. Larry to me was the same person he was before the day of the conversion, or the day after. I mean, Larry, that didn't change who Larry was, not even, a little bit.
Well, I think the congregation was very much divided on the issue whether to accept Larry into the congregation. There were people who were very supportive of Michael, who felt that he was doing something very admirable in repaying hate with love. There were others who were, and I think still are, very angry at the episode. They felt that Michael was spending an awful lot of time with Larry, on Larry's needs, and that he was neglecting people in the congregation who were perhaps equally needy.
Late one night, Larry confessed to Julie a number of lies. He had never been a mercenary soldier. He had never been in the Hells Angels. He had never fully divulged the extent of his hate crimes.
And I guess the most difficult thing that he had to say was that these black kids in reform school never raped him, that he had no reason to be a racist, that he created his own racism through this mythology this lie that he had created in his head about this rape.
I think Larry did have a fantasy that he was going to be this great, powerful leader of a racist organization. And we do become what we believe we are. But the truth is, it never became who he was. Because if it really was Larry, then Larry could never have responded to a telephone call or a few telephone calls from a person like me, and to a hand of friendship from a person like Julie. He would have said, "Get the hell out of here. What are you, crazy? I hate you. You're the enemy."
One day, in August, after handling his trains, Trapp suffered a mild heart attack. He recovered, but his condition became even more precarious. He began to move seamlessly between dream and conscious states. He dreamed he was stuck in a circular saw and was being chopped into pieces. When his kidneys began to malfunction, the accumulating toxins in his bloodstream amplified his hallucinations.
Larry, at some points on the way out to the car, just stopped his wheelchair, put his hands on the wheels and stopped it, and he looked at me and said, "Am I dying?" And I said, "Yes, you are." And he started to cry. And then he told me, he said, "The car is filled with soda bottles." And I said, "No, it's not." And he said, "Yeah, I know."
The night that Larry died, Julie went downstairs and woke up the kids and told them Larry had died. And it was sort of interesting what they did. They all came upstairs and said goodbye, even though Larry was already gone. And they left the room, and we called the hospice people, and they called the funeral home, and Larry's body was taken away. Julie made sure it was covered with a quilt rather than a plastic bag that they usually used. That's how he died. It was really not a horrible way to die, it was pretty sweet, actually. We just knew that an episode in our life was over, and we would be going forward to other things pretty soon.
This is where the story ends. The names, the addresses, the phone calls, the hallucinations, the apologies, the soft, subtle voice. There is other evidence. Larry had a tarantula named Samantha, and he would often answer the door with her sitting on his head. In 1983, Julie converted to Judaism. Before he met the Weissers, Larry wrote a poem to Donna Polk that ended, "During Black History Month, let's all do our share. Deport a nigger, no true white folks will care. Well, this is the end of my poem, don't you see? Them black bastards belong in a tree." After Larry's death, Michael stood before his congregation and told them that before becoming a cantor, he was convicted for armed robbery, assault, and battery in the 1960s. During his incarceration at Auburn State Prison, he wrote a poem. The stigma of an ousted man remains until his death. Hunted, harried, chased, and more, until he takes his final breath. Even then, he isn't free. His memories despoiled. His children's reputation soiled. Larry's personal effects, Klan propaganda, flags, Aryan greeting cards, mail-order bride inquiries, the Disney script, as well as newspaper and magazine articles on the Weiser-Trapp encounter, are kept in a cardboard box, in a closet, in the Weissers' home.
The story of Larry Trapp and my family is a very important story to us. All of its details are very important to us. But I wouldn't tell you all the details, because in a way, the most personal of the details are really nobody else's business. The essence of the story, I think, belongs to everybody.
What people thought about the situation from their perspectives, they thought it was this huge, timeless, biblical event that was, I don't know, like my dad is some messenger of God, and we were angels of mercy, and we brought in this lost soul into our home and endured this situation with him, and spoke to us as if we were martyrs, really. But inside the house, it was, we ate together, played together. Larry listened to tapes. He had train sets.
Larry, I miss him. I mean, I do. I loved him. We had some really good times. I mean, there was some pretty awful times, but we had some really good times.
I think many people in the community felt that Michael and Julie did this for the publicity, that it was not real, that Larry was using them or they were using him. When you were in the home, it was very obvious that this was not the case. It was very genuine, the love they had for each other, and it's me.
But it wasn't an easy issue, and I thought it was resolved. And I had come, can't speak for anyone else, I had come to terms with it. This was an incident that was in the past. But I think the more distance I have from it, I think it paradoxically, the more bitter I feel.
And there are going to be people out there who say, well, Larry Trapp's no longer Grand Dragon State of Nebraska. But at least now we know that the Klan is an active entity in the state. So let's look and see where we can, who we can locate to join the outfit. There are people who just, are joiners like that. And then there are some who will think, well, this is good. here's a Klansman who's changed his mind, and if this person's saying this, maybe if he's got racist ideas, maybe he'll say, well, let me kind of look things over. This is what I'm hoping. They'll say, well, let me think about this another time. Let me try to learn more about the other races to see why it is that I'm fighting them, why it is that I hate them.
I don't really care to denigrate Larry's memory, and yet, there's this whole issue of like the truth, and I think that there will always be dishonesty that's connected with this story, and really it's been one of the things that has just not been okay, but I don't have any choice, sort of. I feel like that there's a part of it that's very personal, that's there that I'm not willing to really deal with. And so there's this, publicly deal with, and so there's this whole part of it that's dishonest, and it sort of fits, actually, given all the things that went on. It fits.